please, by all means, I'll stop, but please ask questions. We've got a smaller group on the phone, so I'd really like this to be interactive. And I think candidly, the best IDP conversations come from just like questions you've seen in the field. So please at any point come off mute. I am monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, please post them there
Yeah,
too.
Ryan had a few questions. First of all, he said, those are some interesting cat names. It's not really a question, but it is a reference to the cats.
I don't know. Why can I not go back in this PowerPoint? I've used PowerPoint before.
Should be able to.
Here we go.
The back arrow, yeah.
We're just gonna do that. So actually, I saw someone say Turkey. There's only a few places in the world, surprisingly, you can hot air balloon. This is actually in Mexico City, and I will say this is not the best picture to describe it. I've done it twice now. It's like $130, which is not cheap, but relative to I think what the price is in the US, it's pretty cool. But what's cool about this is in right outside Mexico City, there's some pyramids and ruins called Teotihuacan, and there's a sun pyramid and a moon pyramid, and it's a sunrise hot air balloon. So you actually float over the sun pyramid while the sun's rising. So it's really, really cool. If you're ever in Mexico City, could not recommend it more. But yeah, it's if you just type in like hot air balloons Mexico City, the only place they do it is over the actual ruins. But to float over the sun pyramid as the sun comes up is pretty special. So her and I just did that recently. But yeah, cool. Yeah, any other questions? And like I said, I'm monitoring. But yeah, Turkey, I want to do the Turkey one. I've heard the Turkey one's awesome because you also float over some ruins in Turkey as well. But cool. So jumping into the tech. And so before we actually do anything, I do want to take some time to kind of go through nomenclature. If you've heard this before and you already know what OCR is, I promise I'll explain it hopefully a little bit cooler than what you've seen. But I do want to go through some terminology that we hear with document processing a lot, just to level set. My number one pet peeve when we hear document processing is when people call, yeah, we want to explore your OCR solution. A lot of times when people say OCR solution, what they really mean is your document processing or intelligent document processing, which is IDP. That's what they mean, but they say OCR. So I know you might already be familiar with it, but in short, what OCR is it's the process of taking text on paper, like on a document, on an image, and then making it digital. So what we really mean by that, and maybe this is a cool spin or you haven't heard or thought about it this way, OCR technology itself, I think, is extremely impressive. OCR itself is an actual machine learning model. And so under the hood, what's happening is it looks at the text on page and it's doing some really complicated processing where it's looking at curves, pixel clusters, edges, corners, and then based off the corners, the edges. So kind of what's under the hood when it does like the actual OCR, when the model applies, when we apply the model to the picture, it's actually taking it out and looking at feature vectors. So again, okay, this combination of pixels, edges, corners, what letter does this most likely resemble? Does it resemble a K? Does it resemble a Y? And so that's why when you look at OCR, one of the limiting factors in OCR is languages and alphabets more specifically. Because if you think about it, each OCR model has to actually be trained on an alphabet. For example, like an O here in English, based off the pixels and corners and edges that this complicated image processing model can pull out. An O in English might be an O, but in Korean, that's a completely different character. But in Korean, or Hangul is the alphabet, it looks like an O, but it's a very different character. So OCR models are usually trained both on the alphabets and specifically languages. So that's why you might see like Amazon Textract, for example, is really, really good at everything but Asian languages. And that's because they've trained it on like the Roman alphabet. But again, then you've got your English variant. Then you have your language variants. Getting a little bit in the weeds, but I do think it's interesting. People usually, I don't feel like they respect what OCR does. But what I do want to point out is when we look at OCR, OCR is helpful, but I always joke, it doesn't actually really do anything from the perspective of automation. And what I mean by that, this was a scanned in document of some Chinese characters. And then if you look down here below, there's a notepad that I pulled up called extracted. This was the original document. This is what the OCR put out. If you notice, worked pretty well. Like we can see the difference. But this is what I was getting at is all it does is take the text on an image or document and then create a digital representation of it. Super helpful if we want to digitize a document or like keep like a digital collection. But in the realm of automation, it doesn't actually do anything for us. Like if I say, okay, hey, I need the invoice number or I need to understand like what the contracted fee was in this contract, which is, I think is a Chinese contract. If we look at that, not super helpful. We have the digital text, but someone still has to go in and interpret that digital text to figure it out. So while OCR is really cool to actually take something and make it digital, that's where IDP comes in. And what IDP is it takes the digital text, so the output of OCR, and actually helps us pull fields from it that we can actually use. So that's why IDP, I think the emphasis on IDP is the intelligent piece, is OCR will get us the digital text, but it doesn't do us any good if we don't actually have the specific fields we need for the automation or for the process we're working on. So again, IDP is the process of once we have the digitized text, how do we put meaning? How do we actually find something specific we need out of that text? And that's a whole nother model that gets applied on top of that. So again, just in summary, OCR, we digitize the text from image or documents. IDP is from that digital text. Let's pull pieces of text or fields that are actually meaningful for a process. So giving that, giving that text some intelligence behind what do we need to move forward with the automation. I plugged this in a session that I had specifically just with like Diane and team, but I do want to put this out there because I think it's cool. When we look at OCR, for some reason in my PowerPoint today, I cannot go backwards, so I'm just going to go back here. If this is my one plug, so if you're like, I didn't really learn anything new from this presentation, hopefully this is kind of cool. If you remember back in the day when you did CAPTCHAs, like, you log in and it's like, hey, prove you're a human. Nowadays, the CAPTCHAs are pretty intense and I think pretty complicated. But back in the day, if you remember the CAPTCHAs, used to just say like, like write the letters in this. And it was like kind of like a weird picture of some letters and you had to type in like MKX, whatever. So what that was actually a project put on by Google. And I think it's called Google Books. And Google wanted to actually digitize a bunch of old books and create like digital copies of them. That's a great use case for OCR. However, they were still working on their OCR engine. So when you would use a CAPTCHA and it give you the random letters, that was actually you as a human providing input to train that model and to train that OCR model. So someone was smart enough to be like, Google needs data to train their models on letters. We need a way to prove that this is a human and not a robot. So someone had the brilliant idea of like, what if we just present images, have the human provide what we call labels, or the humans provide input to the model and say, okay, this is an M, this is a K, this is an X. So CAPTCHAs for the longest time were actually training models. So it's a really cool way to actually like a business use case of like, we could make money off just providing data and we can use human capital for anybody trying to log into this application to actually feed in that data. So if you think about it now with CAPTCHAs, we have like the car ones where now it's like select all the pictures that have like a bus in it and there's like one singular pixel of a bus and you're like, oh, I don't know if it's the square or not. It's the same concept. So I don't know who specifically is getting that data, but like self-driving cars, that's why a lot of those are like select the bus, select the crosswalk. Now those models are pretty robust. So if you notice, some of the CAPTCHAs are like really different and really new. And it's because there's not necessarily as much of a need for training data like that. And now they're just getting creative because OCR engines can actually solve CAPTCHAs now. So some automations, I know at UiPath, they did it a couple times. We're like, it says prove you're human, but we could actually just use a robot because like image recognition and OCR had gotten so good that we could solve those, through automation as well. But anyway, so hopefully that was interesting. If not, if you don't know what I'm talking about with the CAPTCHA, I hope you've used the internet before, but we'll see there. The other thing that I want to point out, and this is kind of wrapping up just nomenclature, we'll actually dive into it. I hear this a lot just in industry, and people will be like, oh, well, like, does your IDP solution support active learning? I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit with something technical. If what I'm saying makes no sense, don't worry about it. You can just focus on the right-hand piece when we get there. But active learning is like in machine learning, when you're training a model, you usually have to provide data to that model. Say, exactly like the CAPTCHA example. Hey, we had 3,000 users type in letters from this CAPTCHA. Here's 3,000 examples of a digital version of the text and what it actually should be. Go, machine learning model, take this input and learn and get better. What active learning actually is the model itself and the algorithm behind that model chooses what data it wants to use next. So the model itself is kind of going in and pulling the data it wants. Really cool advancement in machine learning. But what's weird is in active learning, when people refer to an IDP, I don't think they actually know what it is. So there's something called passive learning. And passive learning is the CAPTCHA example, where the user gives all of the parameters and labels and data to train the model, and then the model just takes that and consumes it. So it's kind of interesting because the reason I'm bringing this up is I've heard this phrase so many times, like, oh, does your IDP solution support active learning? I think what they actually mean is passive learning. And taking that a step further, what I mean by that is when they say active learning, I think what they're trying to convey is, hey, can our model take user feedback and get better over time? We'll dive into what I mean by machine learning, like extraction and stuff, but there's ways to use models to extract data from documents. And in that case, let's say maybe the model makes a mistake and it pulls the wrong number for invoice number. We can have humans actually go in and correct that and say, hey, no. The model was wrong. That's not the invoice number. This is the invoice number. And some IDP solutions allow you to take that human input and retrain the model based off the human input. Usually that kind of like, can the model take user feedback, user validation, and actually train itself to get better over time? That's usually what I think people mean when they mean active learning. Some people do actually know what it means and it's a little more technical, but did want to throw that out there. You might hear someone be like, oh, do you guys support active learning? Again, all they mean is if the model's wrong and a human validates and gives the right data, can the model learn and get better? So just want to throw that out there. I do feel like I see that a lot. I will actually show MuleSoft's approach to this, I promise, but I do think that there's some nuances to document processing I like to bring up. So when it comes to how do we actually get data off of a document, there's really two big buckets of how we do that. The first bucket and the first approach is what I call a templated approach. Someone else might call it something different, but in general, it's creating templates. And so what this is it's a prescriptive approach to actually getting data off a specific document layout. Notice I'm not saying document type, I'm saying document layout. And what I mean by that is if you have invoices, think about how many different variations of invoice layouts there are. Templates are usually applied to a specific document layout. So like specifically, what does the Fox invoice look like compared to a DirecTV invoice, compared to a invoice from your local veterinarian? So templates are usually applied to very specific document layouts. I've kind of drawn it on screen already, but since we're on Zoom, I can actually draw this out. Give me a second. So what's cool about some of the templated approaches, UiPath has one, HyperScience, so these are companies that support this. A lot of the templated approaches, the way you actually build it is you'll set up some kind of schema or layout of, from this document, these are the fields I want to extract. Let's say like shipping address, invoice number, date. And then the way you actually build the template is you'll upload an example of that document. So let's say I upload this Fox invoice and I actually go on the document and I literally just draw boxes. So I'll say, okay, this box is where you'll find the date. This box is where you'll find the total. Like this box is where you'll find the complete total, things like that. And so I've already kind of drawn boxes on screen. For a lot of the solutions, HyperScience included, Abby is a little bit more complicated on how you do this, but it really is like box drawing. And it sounds silly, but it's super easy to build, super quick, super easy. And again, it's not a super high technical barrier. Like anyone can say like, okay, I need to tell this approach, I need to tell this template where to find the date. You just highlight over it. And some of the templates are pretty robust in the sense I can say, okay, this pixel location, so this bounding box of pixels is where you'll find the date. I can also say, but also look for the word date. And if you find the word date, relative to the word date, look at these pixels over here. Or I can even say like, okay, I'm gonna use the word invoice here. So when I create the template, it's gonna remember how many pixels wide and how many pixels tall this invoice section is. And let's say like in the scan, they shrink the scan down, but the scan's blown up. It can actually scale these boxes you've drawn relative to some kind of anchor point. So if that doesn't make sense, long story short, if the word invoice gets bigger, it knows to make these extraction boxes bigger. So it can kind of scale the boxes you draw accordingly. Again, these solutions are really easy to build. You don't need to be technical. It's like, do you know what a date is and can you draw a box on a document? So they're really quick and easy to build. One of the things I also want to point out, I say us, technically, when I say us, I mean MuleSoft Automation. We actually don't have this approach. So we don't do the box drawing technique of like making a template. We do something called key value matching. And so our solution kind of out of the box, and this is if you're just using RPA, you're not really using anything intelligent. When we apply our OCR engine on top of it, MuleSoft has the ability to do what we call key value matching. So what I mean by that is it's going to extract all the text off the document and it's going to do its best to be like, okay, this looks like a key, this looks like a value. Again, it's a model under the hood kind of doing that. But the reason I'm classifying this as a templated approach is it's not super robust to like changes. So if you look like invoice number, invoice pound sign, invoice NO period, there's lots of different ways to write the word invoice number. So you would kind of write a very tailored solution saying, okay, in the OCR results, go find the value that corresponds with the key invoice NO. And we have a solution, again, different than drawing the boxes, but it's the same kind of concept. We're creating a very specific, tailored, very specific approach to how to get data off that document. We just use like a key value pair setup instead of of doing this box drawing to do the associations. And I know that sounds silly, but truly, like UiPath solution of building templates is you just draw a bunch of boxes. It's super easy to use. Hyperscience, Abby, Power Automate, they all have something that kind of looks like that. Ours, we don't do the boxes again. We do more key value matching. But again, it's pretty straightforward. You literally just say, okay, I'm going to map the invoice number to the words invoice NO, and then whatever value it matches will be fine. So kind of different, but any questions on this templated approach? Questions, comments, concerns? I am monitoring the chat. So if you got any questions.
Is there a benefit to MuleSoft's approach?
To our approach, so I think candidly what happened is we acquired the solution. And so they already kind of had one out there. So we were like, okay, like why rebuild this whole kind of interface with drawing boxes when we have something that works? I think what's nice about it though, is we do have ways to abstract it. So I mentioned earlier, you can explicitly say like find invoice NO. There's ways if you're familiar with like regex or something that you could write something to be a little bit more open-ended. So like the keyword we're looking for is invoice and then some kind of thing after it. Or hey, you might see a colon, you might not see a colon. You might see the word NO, you might see the pound sign. So it is a little bit more robust. The other reason I like that is how I mentioned earlier, the kind of scale factor. So like you can kind of set something as a reference point and say, hey, like the word invoice here is X pixels by X pixels. The box I drew for this field is X pixels by X pixels. If this pixel box gets bigger or smaller, scale this accordingly. It doesn't work perfect all the time, but the key value pair matching is pretty like stable because it's always going to kind of like the document itself is going to be laid out the same. And one of the limitations with like the box approach is it is sometimes brittle depending on like how different do the pixels get. Like let's say if someone scanned in the document like crooked, like kind of diagonally, some solutions are really good about accommodating for that and like shifting it back to where it needs to go. Some aren't. So the box approach is really great if you have a really consistent scan or like a really consistent online form, but it can break down if like things do skew and stuff. So there is some kind of like flexibility on like the box approach, but it is still brittle and still kind of depends on the quality of the document. Whereas I think the key value matching is a little more flexible.
So basically this approach that MuleSoft has would make it easy so that if I had a paper and I took a picture of this writing, it would, and I scanned it in using the key value approach, it should be able to pick that up and match, right? Versus doing all this drawing like invoices here, this is here. It should pick it up.
It can. I was gonna say handwriting, we'll cover that in a second. Handwriting is kind of its own different beast as a whole. Everything I'm talking about, I'm just assuming digital text. Sorry, I probably should preface that. We'll talk about handwriting at the end because that's kind of its own.
Is it a
Cool.
part of
Okay.
RPA process?
Is which part of the RPA process?
I mean, IDP is a part of MuleSoft RPA process.
It's part of MuleSoft automation. It's not necessarily part of RPA, but it's part of MuleSoft automation. But what's nice is the MuleSoft RPA has activities and stuff to actually like make it super easy now. Like the latest update of the RPA builder makes it really easy to use our IDP solution. This that I just talked about here, the template already exists within RPA. The new stuff that we're going to show, that's part of the newer, if you've got the newest version of RPA builder, they've got some really easy activities to connect to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I know we're still going through some basics.
So that means you'll have both approaches, right? Because the template approach is in the old version, and then the new IDP, you would have the key value, right?
Yes, and that is exactly one of the points we're going to make in the future is you should use both. I think I've seen some people and some consultants kind of go through and like some partners even go through like it's this to that. Like I think the best approach you can take is using both methods, and we'll talk about that in a second too. So good call out there. Yeah, I guess any other questions? And I'd be happy. Like, and so when I say this, like I've used Abby, Hyperscience, UiPath. I haven't used Power Automate's templated yet, but I know it's something similar. So if anyone does have any specific questions, be like really happy to talk about it. Like the UiPath build experience, like I work for MuleSoft now. The UiPath build experience was super nice, but like I mentioned, sometimes if the document's skewed or something, that's where it go a little bit haywire. So think like digital forms where like scanning is not really a thing. Like it's more just like it's just a digital form they fill out, maybe via like Adobe or something like that. That is the prime use case for some kind of like templated approach.
With the key value approach, And like you said, if you were looking for that invoice number field, could that be anywhere on the page? It's not unique to a
Yes.
certain spot on the page, correct?
Yes, and I saw that, and that was a really good call out, Diane, that I was going to get to, so that's good. With the pixel boxes, you are limited to where you put the box. Some of the solutions now have some stuff that's a little bit more robust, but really, truly, like the best way to implement this is you draw a box here, that data better show up in that box. But to Diane's approach, when we're looking at the key value pair that we use, and I think, to that point, Whitney, this is another good pro, is that invoice number can show up anywhere in the document because we're just looking for the key, like the name and the value. So it doesn't have to show up in the same place. Whereas with this box approach, you really do, it kind of has to be like where you build the box. The little, like some of them are more flexible again, but for the majority of the solutions, I'd say like if you put a box there, that data better show up in that box. Whereas again, with the key value pair, it's just looking for, hey, I think this is a key. Hey, I think this is a value. It doesn't really matter where on the document that shows up.
Christine, one question on the templated approach. That means we are drawing the pixel boxes. That means we are training the model to read the invoice, or
yeah.
it's
So
an
the cool part, yeah, with the boxes and the template approach, it's not actually a model. So what's actually happening is with like the box approach, the box approach is literally just saying like, I am saying in this pixel coordinate region, there's going to be text. And we're going to associate that text with a field. So it's not, I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of like ML behind it to make sure like there's still OCR being applied to that region, but it's not machine learning in the sense of like intelligently locating where that field is. The key value pair is actually kind of just piggybacking off the OCR model and saying, hey, we OCR the document. This is our best attempt at like a key value pair. So I'd say in this approach, the more like ML side of this would probably be the key value stuff, but I'm calling it a templated approach because you do have to be really prescriptive to the type of document for what key you're looking for. So we'll talk about machine learning a little bit, like the model-based approach, but that's why I put us in like in quote, like in a parentheses, but technically, because technically the key value pair is using machine learning to do its best guess of what is a key and what is a value. But I'm putting this under the templated approach because again, you do have to be really prescriptive with what is the key that we're looking for to associate with the field we need. So that's why I'm saying like it's very prescriptive to that document layout, which is why I'm classifying this key value approach as templated because it is still pretty prescriptive to a document layout.
Thanks, Christine. And one more question on the intelligent.
Yeah.
Invoice can be in any language, but is there any intelligent way to convert that to an English language while reading the document?
If it's cool, can I table that? Because we'll get to languages and handwriting.
Oh.
Okay, if that's okay, just because we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. And I think that'll be a good time to have that discussion.
Sure.
And then I see something from Kavya, can it process various document formats? Yeah, most solutions now, I think the only thing I've seen not supported is like GIFs at this point. Like most of them should support PNG, JPEG, PDF. I would say JPEGs just tend to be a little bit lower quality, but most like TIFFs even, I think the only one I don't see is like GIFs, which makes sense because a GIF is kind of just like a bunch of images together. But yeah, so our solution does as well as pretty much every other solution out there at this point. But really fast, wrapping this up, we'll get to machine learning. The templated approach, again, pros, if the document's nice and clean, you get really, really great results. They're super accurate, you usually get back what you need. Most of the tools to build these approaches are, again, like I mentioned, pretty easy to use. And then you can take a variety of templated approaches to get the data off a document. The reason I'm going to bring this up is like when I was talking about our key value pair, every other vendor that I just showed on that last document can use a key value approach. They can use regex and just take the OCR results and then use regex on it. I think MuleSoft is more geared toward making it easier to do the key value pair because for the longest time, that was our only option. Like we didn't have like a box drawing solution. So I will say like the other solutions and other vendors, I think they're like most of their time and effort went into making the interface for the box drawing easier than the key value pair, whereas we didn't have that option. So I think MuleSoft is a little bit easier to do the key value pair comparative. But that's what I'm saying is if you want like UiPath, right now, I'm just using UiPath that work there. They could do the box drawing approach and use like a regex approach if they want. It's really, but again, you're creating a solution that's very custom tailored to one layout of a specific kind of document, which is why we still classify it as templated. Cons, again, maintainability, like, if something breaks, the document changes, you have to go back in and change that template. Brittleness, I've already talked about that. If somebody scans it in kind of diagonally, A lot of these solutions do have like pre-processing stuff that'll make it better. But again, how much better, how bad was the scan, things like that are kind of limiting. And then scale. And the reason I say scale, and this is where we'll talk about and lead into models, like a model-based approach, is the templates are great and they're pretty easy to build. Like I think at UiPath, per like an invoice, I could probably build a template in like give me like 8 minutes, I'd have like a decent template out. But that, that wasn't testing or training it. That was just like my first pass. If you had to do this for hundreds of documents and hundreds of layouts, no one's going to want to maintain 100 templates. No one's going to really take the time to build 100 of them. So there's like a time and place for when a template makes sense. And I will say this is a really good, for anyone on the call that cares about this, I think this is a really good sign of a partner. Is I'd say upper limit for a template for one use case would be like 20 templates. Anything more than that, I don't think that's going to be a successful implementation, because at that point, like that's just too much to manage and too much stuff. Like I've seen a partner come in and be like, yeah, we'll create 100 templates for you. And I told the customer, I was like, I would not use them as a partner, because that's just not the right mindset to do it. Because long-term maintaining that is going to be a nightmare. So I was like, that's probably not the best approach. So we'll cover the next side. So again, we've got the 2 buckets of how to do this. I'd say template is one, machine learning is the other. I promise, by the way, for anyone on this call, we will actually show what our solution looks like. IDP is just pretty complicated and there's a lot of moving parts, so I like to break it down. The other big approach we see is an ML-based approach. And what I mean by this is it's a model that's been trained and created specifically to take OCR results and extract the fields out that we need. Most of those vendors I showed on that other page do have some version of a model-based approach as well. But when I break this down real quick, what I mean by this is they're hard to make. So a lot of companies spend a lot of time and a lot of resources making these models. And when I talk about models, for example, like us at MuleSoft, we just released our solution this month. Like I think it just went GA, like beginning of this month, late April. We have 2 models that you can use out of the box. We have an invoice model and a purchase order model. To create those models, I think we used hundreds of thousands of documents. We had to label them. We'll break that down in a second. We had to label them. We had to train the model. We had to reiterate on the model. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes pretty complicated and skilled machine learning engineers to like validate this and make sure everything is going well. So the ML approach in general to get that base model out is pretty hard. But the cool part about ML is once the model's been released, it's pretty easy for people to kind of just plug and play and use it. So that initial effort to create the model is a little bit difficult, which is why I say most vendors have out of the box ones. But that's why I warn is if a customer wants like their own custom model, regardless of who they go with, it's a pretty lengthy process. And that's just because like, let's say this is a really good example. When I worked at UiPath, somebody wanted to make a model specifically for like a very specific type of bank contract. And like when we asked them about it, we're like, okay, we could do this, but to make this model even somewhat remotely effective, granted, this was 5 years ago, ML has gotten a little bit better with what it needs. But our requirements, like we need like thousands, if not tens of thousands, if preferably hundreds of thousands of examples of these. And the hard part with making these models is a lot of customers will come and be like, we'd like a custom model for blank type of document, but they're not going to have enough examples to actually use to make that model in the first place. So it's kind of like, so when you see a lot of these companies and like, oh, we've got an invoice model, think about how many invoices exist in the world. You know what I mean? Like, or hey, we've got a driver's license model. These are data points that you can buy relatively easy or acquire relatively easy to make these models. That's why you don't see a lot of these models being released by customers or companies that are very, very tailored, because a lot of times getting access to the documents to make those models is really difficult. I know I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but I think these sessions that's kind of what they're for, hopefully. But one thing I want to share real quick, and then I'll pause and kind of come back. When it comes to actually creating a model, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but did want to show what some of this effort looks like. If we look, this is actually Google's solution, but did want to show kind of a little bit. On the left-hand side here, these are all fields that they're looking to extract from this document, right? So like social security number, identification number, address, things like that. When we look at how would you actually make a model for this, is someone has to go into examples of the document itself, indicate where on the document is the field they want to extract, and associate it back to a field. So what I mean by that is like, if I got this document, every solution has a different way to do this. But in essence, what would happen is someone would come over to this document, draw boxes again, draw a box over the address, and whether it's a click, some kind of keyboard shortcut, but they would then associate, hey, like, sorry, one second, getting my drawing back. They'd somehow associate saying, hey, okay, we extracted this. This box maps to this field here. So there's like every solution has a different way to do it, but someone has to go into all of these documents, label where in the document you find the field, and then what field it actually maps to. Then they do that over and over and over and over. And that's the data that actually feeds into the model. So I want to just show that a lot of times there's like ways for like, there's actually intelligence to like do this automatically and do the mapping. And then a human just reviews and says, okay, this looks good. Let's put it through. But the idea is this process I just showed, whether it's automatic or humans doing it, gets done thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that's the data that gets fed into the model that can then be used to extract data. No, we're getting a little in the weeds there. Hopefully that's interesting for some people on the call, but that's kind of like what it looks like underneath the hood. So reason I say
you're
that.
doing great.
Okay.
I think you're doing great. I would stay in the weeds because we're pretty technical at Integration Quest and our
Cool.
viewers. And I'll say I've seen one demo of this, and I wasn't given this deep knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes. So I think you're doing great.
Cool. Thanks. I appreciate that. And we'll get into like us versus them. I will say MuleSoft, if it sounds like I'm talking about UiPath a lot, I just worked there for 3 years. So like I know kind of the inner workings, and they are like a big person in the IDP space. MuleSoft is getting there, and like we'll cover roadmap and stuff. We just released our solution I think last month was like when it dropped. So but I'm gonna pause really quick and answer some of the questions I saw in the chat. We have some more stuff to talk about here, but I saw Kavya ask, can a process vary we already did the document format. Ram, is there any limitation on the size of document? We have a limitation. Everyone has a limitation. I don't know what that size limitation is, but usually every vendor does have a size limitation. If that's the case, what we try to do is use classification maybe per page and figure out like based off the OCR results, does this page contain these keywords? Meaning like, is this actually a page we need to work on that's relevant? Kind of just pull that page out, and then we would run that page or that set of pages through the document processing solution. So that doesn't happen a ton. But for example, like now with LLMs being big, and we'll talk about this too, contracts are a big one. And some of these legal contracts, like 120 pages long. Some of them can process big ones. Like, again, I don't have a good answer. It really depends on the solution and like what their limitation is. The more pages, the longer it takes. Not a surprise, but you know what I mean? The more pages, the longer it takes. So if we have like, I've seen like contracts, like I've seen at UiPath, like it took like 2 minutes to process like an 80-page contract just because it's an 80-page contract, you know what I mean? So yeah, so sorry, that's not like a concrete answer. I'd say every vendor's a little bit different. Images or logos on invoices. So yes, so someone just asked like, can we add images or logos on invoices? That is where I think fields of study have gotten a lot more interesting. If you can think of some logos, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, UiPath actually might be, let me see. UiPath might be a good example of this. Let me see if I'm gonna out myself on something. Cool. So UiPath's logo, if we look at this, something we see a lot, and this has been traditionally kind of a pain. I'm gonna be honest, there's still no good answer. I think everyone does this differently based off implementation. You and I as human beings can read this as UiPath, but if you think about this from like an extraction perspective, the engine might extract UIL path or like some like IUI path or something like that. So it's easy for us to see a lot of logos and a lot of company names on invoices do show up as pictures or their logo, which is like some creative form of the word, you know what I mean? So there's no perfect solution for that. I think what we've actually done in the past that's been helpful is there other information? So what some people have done in the past is, hey, based off the shipping address or the billing address or something about something else on this document, can we map this internally within the ERP and figure out the vendor name? And that sounds silly, but it's just because these logos are so hard. Or like I've seen some before, like, if we look at the call now, I don't know, like Facebook. I don't even know what
One
Facebook
question
is.
here, Christian.
Mhm.
The logo which you showed here, a UI, which is in the box. So if I use a template based, then the box will be treated as a pixel box UI.
Can you say that one more? Sorry, it's just like a little muffled.
Okay, so UI logo has UI in a box, correct?
Mhm.
So if you use a template based approach, whether this box will be treated as a pixel box, what we are trying. It's a box
No.
approach, correct? In the template
Yes.
based.
Oh, are you saying would this like automatically pick up as something?
Yeah.
No, the boxes are only what you draw. So it's just like the actual like template creating like tool they use it only tracks the boxes you draw. If there's a box, it's going to ignore that. Yep. But cool. But yeah, so with this, like candidly, what we still do in practice, OCR technologies have gotten better, but it's kind of hard to know, like if you're using a model-based approach, and this is what we're going to cover too. When you use a model-based approach, you're using this on a wide variety of formats and layouts. It's really hard to understand when do we want to like look at a logo from the perspective of an image rather than just text. Like there's a lot of variability that goes into it. So the solutions I've seen in the past when it's a logo for the question that was put in the chat is, again, is there a field somewhere else in this document that we can map to an internal system somewhere and just say, okay, based off the shipping address, this maps to the vendor name blank, so we're going to pull it that way. Most invoices, if you think about it, that logo's in the top left corner. Do we run like a separate image like extraction model, not OCR, like something slight, or like a specific OCR engine or something on the top left corner to try to pull it out? The problem is again, like if you think about UiPath, it might say UIL path or something, and that's a bit hard to get around. So I don't have a great answer for that, and other than every time I've done something and the logos have come up, we've handled the logo in a different scenario every time. Maybe sometimes we'll look at the OCR results and we've got like a list of the vendors. And if the OCR results don't map to the list of the vendors, then we take the backup and say, okay, well, let's try to map it to a shipping address that we have within an ERP system or something like that. So logos are kind of the bane of the existence. OCR technologies have gotten better, but it still causes a pain. I can't think of a good logo right now that's like difficult, because like even Salesforce, this logo on an invoice works fine because it's pretty clear, and like the OCR engines are good enough to say, okay, that's the word Salesforce. I can't think of a logo right now, but I'm sure we all know them where they're like kind of complicated. Or like a really good example, Nike for the longest time didn't ever put the word Nike on a freaking invoice. They just put the swoop, which is fine because everyone knows what the Nike logo is, but not from an automation perspective, if you know what I mean. So there's some interesting cases. So logos are still a little interesting. We'll cover some of this in a little bit more. But yeah, so really quick, going back to the ML approach, and I see some other questions, so we'll come back. But coming back to the ML approach again, that's kind of what it looks like to train the document. Again, costly to make, kind of difficult. The other thing that's interesting is like, and we'll cover how we handle this at MuleSoft, which I'm pretty happy about. Let's say we do make a model, and let's say a customer comes in and says, hey, our company has this one specific field. Your model wasn't trained to extract this field. Can we retrain the model to now accommodate this field? Everything I just talked about here, you got to go through that entire process again just to add one field in. So what's nice about the models is if the model's trained on the field you need, great. If you need a custom field added to that model, it's a whole nother retrain cycle just to get that one field added in. So some companies that have like very specific nuances to some of their documents gets a little complicated. But when we look at the model-based approach, the reason that we would take this approach is, and I know everyone uses invoices, but I'm going to use an invoice again. If we think about invoices, most companies and big corporations get hundreds of thousands of vendors. Like we talked about earlier, the template. You're not going to make hundreds and thousands of templates. It's just not sustainable. So what they would do is they use a model-based approach to get data off the document. And when we use a model, again, it's a pre-trained model. It takes in those results from OCR and says, okay, our best guess is this is the invoice number. This is the line items table. This is et cetera. The advantage is it's flexible across a variety of documents. You know what I mean? Like it handles different variations. Some models, we'll talk about this, going back to that active learning thing I talked about, can actually get better over time. Like when it fails, it can learn from the failures and get better over time. And then most of these tools come with some kind of nice review mechanism to be like, hey, human, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need you to look at this and tell me if it's right. So there's some kind of like built-in review screen or UI with most of these tools so that the human can review the results. The last thing too with cons is it's going to result in a higher volume of straight through processing. Will not result. Oh, that's haha. Oh, I guess for some reason my slide didn't update. This is odd. Let me see something. Apologies there, y'all. I don't know. These don't look like my most interesting. I added some slides and I don't see why this is happening. Okay. Anywho, apologies. Ignore this. The cons, I'll update this for the slide deck I pass over after for y'all. But anyway, yeah, this was supposed to say it doesn't result in higher volumes of straight through processing, and we'll cover what I mean by straight through processing. But in short, that just means humans don't have to touch it. It's so confident, the values are so correct that nobody needs to review it. With template approach, we have high levels of straight-through processing. With machine learning approaches, we have lower levels of straight-through processing. Just because if you think about the variety of invoices that exist in the world, the model's going to do its best, but it's still going to have some failures. So usually templates are created because these documents have really high levels of confidence when it comes to the extraction. The results are pretty accurate. Models tend to see lower levels of confidence, lower levels of accuracy. So it means more human involvement, more human review. So we'll cover that. So real fast, I want to end on this, and I've got a couple more slides. I know I've been doing slides, but we'll do live demos here in a second. This is what I think everyone should do. This is my personal opinion, but I've been in the industry for a while, and I think this is what works best, is a hybrid approach. It really depends on the use case, which approach makes the most sense. If you're doing a online form, like you fill it in via like a PDF editor or something like that, use templates. Don't worry about models. Just use templates. You can just very clearly say, this is where to find the field. This is where to find the field. Medical intake forms are good examples of that. We'll cover handwriting though, because that kind of caveats everything. But let's look at invoices, purchase orders, contracts, bank statements, things that are, relatively structured as far as the document goes, but come in a variety of flavors. Hybrid is definitely the way to go. And what I mean by that is we'll sit down with the customers for invoices. This is what I do with all of our customers. I'd be like, okay, cool. Do you guys have a breakdown of your vendors and how many invoices they send? Because like we worked with one company and Amazon accounted for 15% of their invoices. And I was like, okay, cool. For Amazon, we're going to make a template. We're going to do a very templated, tailored approach for Amazon. That way, 15% of all of your invoices that come in are going to be pretty accurate and, won't need a lot of human intervention. But for all the rest of your documents, because it seems like you don't really have any other really prevalent vendors, we're going to throw them through the model, and the model is going to do its best, understanding that you're probably still going to have to review some of them and make sure that the data is correct. But that's why I say a hybrid approach is best. Sit down, work with your customers, figure out, hey, of your total documents that we're looking at, is there some proportion of document layout that's really prevalent or we see a lot? Build templates for those, and then throw everything else through machine learning. Again, when it comes to IDP processes, and this is something I really try to drive home, it's going to be perfect. These automations are the hardest kinds to build. It's never going to be 100% perfect. Our goal is, can we make it more efficient than doing it manually? And I think that's a really big thing to drive home there. Yeah, Whitney, what's up?
Yeah, so in your previous slide, for the approach where you're doing the templated approach, is that just using the out-of-the-box MuleSoft RPA, and then the machine learning approach is using IDP?
Yes,
Or
for
the
MuleSoft,
non-template?
that's
Okay.
what that would look like. Yeah, for a MuleSoft
Okay.
approach, that would look like. I'm still talking a little bit vague. So here, I'm not really talking about a specific
Okay.
vendor. This is more just vague to the industry. But yeah, at
Mhm.
MuleSoft, it would be MuleSoft RPA to go get the like
Mhm.
key value pair matching. And then the model-based approach would be our IDP solution.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. And then I also saw some things. Caveat, if the address is in the document twice, it usually pulls the one that it has a higher confidence for. You can set up these models to a lot of times to give you both, and then figure out like you can take the first instance, the second instance. A lot of times by default, the way that these work is if it sees the same address twice, it'll take the one with the higher confidence score, because that happens sometimes. IDP, our IDP solution, and we'll cover this with the MuleSoft side, we don't allow BYOB or BYOM, bring your own model. We don't allow that. Most of the other solutions, this is gonna sound weird, they do and they don't, in the sense of like Hyperscience is one of the best solutions in the market for IDP, in my opinion. That's like all they do. Like their company is hyper focused on that. And they do a great job. But that being said, the way that their models are created fits in really well with how you use their tool, like how you build the models, how you review them, and things like that. So a lot of these tools allow you to bring your own model. Just understand that there's going to be some work involved with changing up the model so that it fits in with the tooling itself. Like the review mechanisms of how do we review failures and things like that. A lot of times the model output and the model results are tailored in a way that supports that. So just know with some of these solutions, if they do support BYOM, you're probably going to have to modify your output or some things about it ever so slightly just to fit in the model of how they support it. So I hope that helps. We can dive into that a little bit more. Cool. Okay, and can you jog my memory? Did you mention OCR was for unstructured data? OCR works with anything. OCR is just the mechanism of pulling data, like digitizing the document. So to that point, Whitney, yeah, OCR works for anything. It's the IDP side is more like, do we use a template? So for unstructured data, you're probably looking at a model because a template would not really work with unstructured data. That's kind of where we're looking at the model-based approach. Cindy, can we apply data manipulation after data extraction? Yep, doesn't matter what approach you take, data manipulation happens after the fact all the time. Really common example is dates. Are we dealing with the European invoice? Are we dealing with Asian invoices? Are we dealing with US invoices? The date's going to need to be changed. A lot of invoices do like February 18th instead of Feb 18 or 0218. So like those are really common examples of data manipulation. Dollar amounts, like the UK uses commas instead of periods for like decimals. I don't know why, but they do that. A lot of that gets fixed up. So yeah, so it doesn't matter which approach you take, data manipulation is going to happen after the fact anyway. I'm not focusing on that as much. We're going to focus mostly just on like getting the data off the document, but just know that data manipulation does happen. This is the last piece. I know we got 30 minutes left. I do intend to mostly show stuff afterward, but do want to take a point here. I didn't talk about this in our session that we had, Diane. The most important part when it comes to should we even automate this in the first place? Or like if you think about automation, automation's cool, but if we're not saving a customer time or money, which time is money, what's the point of doing this in the first place? And the biggest thing that makes or breaks an IDP automation, any automation that has document processing in it, is how do we handle the failures? So if you're familiar with automation, you'll hear a term called human in the loop. That really just means how do we involve a human in this process? Like when something goes wrong, when something fails, how do we involve humans in that process? So you'll hear human in the loop. That's like a term. Speaking of which, human in the loop. Again, just how do we involve humans when the robot's not working? Usually we see human in the loop, like when do we need to use some kind of human in the loop approach is for validations, meaning, hey, I extracted this, but I'm not super confident that this is actually the invoice number. Can you as a human verify that this was pulled properly? Approvals, think of this more business logic, like, hey, like this invoice, we extracted the data, but before we move on, this invoice is over $10,000. You've got a business rule that says anything over 10 grand needs an approval from somebody to say we can process this. I'm a robot, I can't do this. Hey, human, can you approve this for me? Or just human-centric steps, meaning like things that are purposely not automatable. Like it's, hey, like we thank you for the data. We need to sit and think about this. And as humans, we need to have a discussion before we can move on to the next step. This is not a rule-based thing. But I, as the human, will let you know automation when we're ready to move forward. So there's just some cases in automation where humans need to get involved. I know we already went through this, but I want to revisit again. I'm going to call this straight through processing, STP. You'll hear this a lot in document processing because a lot of the time, this is the only thing that customers will care about. And it's our job to make them understand that this is not the only metric that matters. When people think about automation, and I'm sure like Diane and team, you've seen this. When people think about automation, they're always like, I don't want to see it ever again. I'm going to automate it. And it should just live in the background and I never have to think about it. Document process, any automation with documents is instantly puts it at the highest level of difficulty. And that's just because documents just are complex. They're add a lot of complexity. Review cycles, are we pulling things? How are we extracting them? Like machine learning methods aren't easy. Building templates, while they're easy to build, it's still a document. Like things can go wrong. People spill coffee on documents. There's so many things that can go wrong with the document. And so straight through processing again is the ability for a document to have its fields extracted, regardless of what approach we take, we're getting data off the document to a level of confidence where the human does not need to review it. Meaning we pass a document to this automation and I never need to look at it. Boom. We need automation, whether it's RPA, Composer, whatever approach we're taking, I just don't need to look at it because we're so confident that the automated extraction is right. We don't need to look at it. This is straightforward, straight through processing. The only times, candidly, that I've ever seen straight through processing really be valid at, I'd say, like an 80% of the document level and more, meaning 80% of the documents or more don't need human review, come in the form of tax forms, because that thing's almost always digitally filled out. And you think about like a 1099, it's almost always digitally filled out. It's formatted the same way every time. There's not a lot of variation because it's a tax form. Like intake documents, again, like medical intake documents where the same fields show up the same places. These kinds of things where they're extremely similar, almost always digital. These are great use cases where, okay, straight through processing is something we can actually measure. It's like a KPI we care about. When we think about invoices though, like truly, like why do we care about this? IDP is like anytime we introduce intelligent document processing, again, I can't emphasize this makes the automation one of the more difficult automations to build. And it's for all the reasons we've just been talking about. does the OCR engine actually work properly? Like if it's OCR properly, and this is something I want to bring out, everything we're talking about with IDP depends on the level of the OCR engine. And here's a really good example of this. This is that Chinese one, for example. If you look at this is a different Chinese character. This is the OCR engine saying, okay, I think this is what it should be. Let me digitally represent this character as this character. And this is Chinese, but I don't know if you know how Chinese works. This is now a completely different word with a completely different context. And if you think about like OCR engines, think about zeros versus O's, think about L's versus I's, threes versus E's. OCR, like, you know, your IDP solution, everything we talked about, template, machine, like the model-based approach, all of that is dependent on how good was the OCR extraction. And I'm kind of looping all this together and saying like why it's difficult to really understand like why the difficulties exist. Okay, hey, like if we pull an invoice number and it's not confident enough, who do we want to review it? How do they review it? What do we do now? There's so many complexities. So that's why when we look at straight through processing, really understanding like what are like setting expectation with your customers, saying we are not going to hit 100% here. Our goal is to hit maybe 40%, 50%, and then have your humans review the rest. They're gonna be like, well, what's the point of automating this? Be like, isn't this still going to be faster and more efficient than the way you're doing it now? Like even, and this sounds weird, we've even had use cases where the humans have to review 100% of the documents that get extracted. Just doing that and having a tool that shows them what was extracted and where to find it on the document, having the human review that instead of going through the document completely blank from scratch is still more efficient than doing it manually. So I just want to reemphasize that when we look at IDP processes, a lot of it is, again, like, can we make this more efficient? Not can we make this perfect? And that's really what I want to emphasize there. So I know there's a lot of talking. I'll pause for some questions. I'm actually going to show the product. I'm going to try to leave you guys time at the end. I know Diane for like updates on y'all's side. Sorry if that was a little bit longer, but hopefully that was a little bit more in depth than what you've seen and a little bit more interesting.
Perfect. Perfect. The level of depth is exactly what this group and our audience is looking for. So you're spot on.
Cool. And then, yeah, Alan, yeah, validation's the biggest problem. I'd always say like the validation side of things, truly, like I've seen so many automations go through like a UiPath, and you know, we tried and it failed. And it wasn't just UiPath, like Hyperscience has seen the same thing, Abby has seen the same thing. And again, not because there's it's just this is a hard problem to solve. It's not necessarily that any solution's bad, but that's why the expectation setting is so important. So looking at that, Alan will touch on that a little bit more. Kavya. So Kavya asked what measures are in place to protect sensitive information. That leads into something very interesting where it depends on how they want to implement. So do they want to do a template versus a model? And if they do a model, what are the requirements about the model processing the data? So for example, like if it's PII or like healthcare information, the model that they're using usually has to be deployed on premises. It has to run. There's a whole different setup. A lot of these tools that we're talking about in vendor solutions are all cloud-based. Very few people I know actually offer an on-prem version of this. So like for context, like right now, ours released last month, we don't actually have like a PII masking solution. So there's some solutions that'll say like, we'll go in if it's like a series of numbers that are like 6 digits long or something, and that's usually like a healthcare patient number. You know, it's redacted before it gets processed by the document. Or if it's patient information, like the model that's processing that is an on-prem model handled by their servers. We don't have an on-prem option for this right now. I think, to my knowledge, I think UiPath did and Hyperscience did. I don't know how to say that. And so for some of them, it just depends on, is this something we can mask and like kind of remove from document ahead of time and process? Or truly, is this something that needs to be just processed on an on-prem server? So Kavi, to that point, that is something that comes up. I'd say normally just healthcare space is where that comes in. Healthcare or contracts, like legal and healthcare is usually where we see that become an issue. And I have seen most of the time for healthcare, they do look for something on-prem. Obviously, federal and state too have that limitation. But for most things, I don't think anyone's really had issues with cloud-based processing, like invoice information, things like that. But I don't know if that was the best answer. We can revisit that and I'll give a little bit more thought to it. But usually, again, in summary, what measures are in place to protect sensitive information? Some tools have pre-processing steps like PII masking, where they'll remove keywords or things like that. Our IDP tool is not FedRAMPed right now, I don't believe. I'll double check, but I don't think it's FedRAMPed at the moment. We'd like it to be, but we're handling most of our customers, which are cool with SaaS-based offerings, and usually working with documents that aren't, you know, things that would like any Fed customer or healthcare customer care about. But cool. So I'm actually going to show some stuff real quick and then take some time for questions. I did a lot of talking and you're like, I wish I would have spent more time on the demo. The demo is pretty straightforward because a lot of what we would cover in the demo is what we've talked about. Like I said, IDP is pretty complicated. So our solution, this is what it looks like for us. We do something, we create what we call document actions. So IDP, this is part of our Anypoint platform. So if you're familiar, that's where you access RPA Manager, API Exchange, things like that, or Anypoint Exchange. Our IDP solution is bundled within our Anypoint product, which is like the larger MuleSoft automation product. If I want to start extracting data from a document, I'll go ahead and create new. And what this does for me is we're going to create a new document action after I sign in because I talked too long. One sec. Quick second. Sometimes this is so TMI, but I don't know if your hands ever get sweaty. It like doesn't recognize my fingerprint. And that's like one of the most demoralizing things I think that can happen. So as you can see, when we're creating a document action, for MuleSoft's IDP products at the moment, we have two models. We have invoices, purchase orders. These are pre-built ones, and you can see the fields we extract from an invoice. You can see all the fields we extract from a purchase order. So we've actually gone in and trained a model that extracts all these fields. We also have something called generic. What generic is this is our closest thing to BYOM, because it's not really your bring your own, but this is if you want to extract data from a document that's not an invoice or a purchase order. We'll cover this one in a second, but for the invoice, I'll just do like invoice example. I'll create. So what's cool about how we actually do our solution is for IDP, what I like, and kind of going back to this, we actually have something interesting where when you create a document action, this is where you're telling it, hey, for an invoice, in addition to an invoice, maybe there's other fields I want to pull. But for these 51 fields, you don't actually have to do anything. They're all preset. So what I can do here is actually just pick a file. I'll come in here. Wait 1 second. Demos, invoices. I'm actually going to use one of my pet invoices. So this is where you can upload an invoice, hit run, and it's going to show you the fields I got from it. So if I want to use an invoice like example, I don't need to do anything different. I can just hit run. And again, that's the beauty of pre-trained models. It's going to pull all of these fields automatically for me. And I will say our model's pretty darn good. So if we look at like buyer city, buyer name, and what's cool, and I'm sorry this is small, the way that we formatted, I can't really zoom in. Like I think this is the most I can zoom in. But what's cool is you can see for each field it extracts, it actually has a confidence score saying, hey, this is how confident I was this field was proper. What's cool too is with our solution, you can set a document-wide confidence threshold. So this is the model coming in. And so again, real fast, this is our model-based approach. I'm not going to show the templated solution today. We're only focusing on the model-based approach, which is our new IDP solution. But you can set a model like threshold across the entire document saying, I want this to be at least 80% confident. You can up this threshold. And what's cool is you can actually change the threshold per field. The reason that's important is like maybe for you guys, like the shipping address is less important than the invoice number. Invoice number is probably going to be the most important field on this document next to the total. So if you really care about that, you can up the threshold. What the thresholds do is if the document doesn't hit at least that threshold, then it gets sent to review. So in this case, we can add reviewers. I'm going to actually add myself as a reviewer. Cool, hit add. And you can actually add groups of people too. So all this is saying is when the model goes to run, if it extracts a field, and for any of these fields, if it's less than the desired threshold for that field, it'll automatically get sent to review. These users will get notified, and they can log in the tool to actually review the tool. And we'll show that in a second. But yep, so these are all the different fields. So this is cool. And you can see, you can even too, like when I click on it, like, you can see these were all the documents, these were all the fields were extracted. We do tables as well. So you can actually see it did the table pretty well. So you can see all the price, quantities, things like that. So for description, you can see what it pulled out there. Again, setting thresholds. What's cool about our solution, and this is what I wanted to show. Let's say, and this is where we're a little bit different. Tools nowadays, and I am a little less familiar because I haven't used these tools since I've worked here. Okay, let's say this account number field. The field account number is not extracted. This is not something that our model out of the box has. This is something that I think is so cool about our tool. Is for a UiPath or Hyperscience, traditionally what you'd have to do is, again, go back and retrain this model, add in the account field, and you'd have to go extract all these account numbers. What we do, which is really cool, we actually use Einstein, like our Einstein feature, which is just our LLM wrapped up in what we call the trust layer. It's just another way to make sure that like we're not feeding LLMs your data. It's something specific to your instance of Salesforce, in this case, your instance of IDP, but it allows us to use LLMs. Under the hood, I'm pretty sure what we've just wrapped up is OpenAI, but we've wrapped it up in a way where, again, we're not passing data back. It's kind of isolated to your own instance, and it's a very familiar interface with all the other Einstein tools within the platform. What that means in the context of this is if I want to grab the account number, I'm going to add a new prompt. I'm going to give the prompt a name, and when we think about the name, we're really talking about like a field. So for this prompt, whatever we extract, what variable name, what field do we want to call it? So I'll just call this account number. And then here in natural language, just like you're a prompt engineer, you can ask it to pull that field. So I could say, what is the account number for this invoice? And you can prompt engineer this however you want. You can make the prompt better or worse. I'm just showing you how like pretty lighthearted you can keep it. This is also a pet invoice. So there are doctor's instructions on how to take care of it. You know what I mean? Like this is unconventional, but I'm showing some documents have weird fields that maybe other standard documents don't. So in this case, people probably aren't processing pet invoices, but I like this as an example. So I can call this like doctor's notes. So I can say, this is an invoice from a vet clinic. I can say like toward the bottom of the page, and I don't even have to put this, I'm just prompt engineering here. There is a section where the doctor included notes for pet health. You know, like I can say like, what are the doctor's notes? You could say something like that. Again, you're just giving it a prompt. And so now I've got the two prompts. They're assigned to variable names called account number and doctor's notes. I'll hit run. So the beauty of this is if we go to use these fields in other parts of our automation, I'll still have access to the fields called like vendor city, vendor name. But now I also have access to two variables, two fields called account number and doctor's notes. And so the cool part about this is we've taken the approach of LLMs are going to be far superior models to anything we could home grow, because think about like how much more like data, training, hardware capabilities they have. And so what we like to do is we said, hey, what's the account number? Boom, 99% confident, really great. We've got our account number out. And now here, let me switch it over to Einstein. Now we can see what Einstein pulled. Hey, so here's the doctor's notes. And so from here, the difference is our Einstein tool. I think this one might have, you can pull confidences right now in our interface. We don't have a way to show the confidence of this, but just wanted to show you can use Einstein, you can use LLMs in our tool to actually pull this data out. And I think that's a lot easier than going in and retraining things. So devil's advocate here, well, Christine, like anyone can query OpenAI, like what's stopping UiPath from doing this? I'm sure they do. The difference between how we've built it though is we've incorporated this as part of the actual extraction mechanism and like logic of every time we see this document, how would we do this? Whereas at the moment, UiPath and Hyperscience, they don't have something like this. So you kind of have to add it in after the fact. It's like a post-processing. Whereas instead of us retraining models, this is how you add more context to your document. So what I think is really cool about this, and I'll take a second to pause, we talked about templates and model-based approaches. This is a model-based approach. This is intelligence, this is LLMs, this is a model trained on document fields specifically. But what's cool is if you think about it, we can actually create different variations of this document action. So I could have called this document action like pet invoices. I could also have just a blanket document action called invoices. I can make another one called German invoices. I can make another one called Portuguese invoices. And so what we can do is, depending on, we can do some other stuff prior to actually calling this to make some intelligent decisions of which document action makes the most sense for us to use. And so in that way, this sounds weird. It's a model-based approach, but I kind of think the reason our approach is cool is it's like a model-based approach that can also be used as a template. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully from what we've talked about, that kind of makes sense there, where you can still have a generic document action for all your invoices. But if you do know that like, hey, like Fox has this one field that we normally don't see, or DirecTV does, you can make an action called DirecTV or Fox. And then after it OCRs the document, say, if the document contains the word Fox, use this document action. If the document contains the word DirecTV, use this action. And so we can actually intelligently use these almost as templates, even though the underlying technology there is a model. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. That's why I like to talk about the template versus model approach earlier on. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. 1 second, and I'll answer some questions. What's cool is we can actually hit publish. When we hit publish, this actually publishes it to the API exchange within the Anypoint platform. So what's even cooler about this, and why I like this even better, it creates an endpoint. So your anypoint developers, if they're, pulling things from Exchange, they have access to this document action you created. It'll populate automatically. They don't have to go do any custom configuration. It just shows up as something that they can use within the anypoint platform. If you're using this from RPA, I'm not showing this today, unfortunately, just for time's sake, but the newest version of RPA Builder actually has an action called document action, where from RPA Builder, you can actually just select the name of the document action you want, pass in the invoice path, and from your RPA tool, from the MuleSoft RPA tool, it'll automatically apply all the logic we just built out here and give you back your data like in a JSON strategic format too. So the cool part is when we've published this, I wanted to see it. I just published it already. Okay, cool. So here you can actually see it in Exchange. Let's see if it'll let me log in, if it's going to be nice. But yeah, so you can see in Exchange. So everything, like if you've ever taken Diane's hyper automation course or anything like that, everything ties together here. So now, again, this is the document action. You've got all your stuff. You can go add documentation if you'd like. But the beauty of it is that endpoint exists and now it's consumable across your entire organization. So when we look at our solution, candidly too, if they've got MuleSoft, if they're just going point to point, we don't have any MuleSoft, we just want an IDP solution, we can still hold our ground. But if they're an anypoint shop on top of that, it just adds the beauty of look at this platform-based approach we take here. Another thing that so I guess any questions there while I transition? So that's kind of what it looks like to work with either, again, invoices or purchase orders. I'll show like a document that's not one of those two, but any questions on that so far?
What type of document or what type of asset is that in Exchange? Click back on Exchange again for me a second.
Yeah. Boop.
It's a REST API. Okay, so it could also be used in Composer as a shared API, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Sorry, Composer too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot about that one. I just didn't. I literally did the invoice processing on an RPA all morning, so that's why it's
cool. Yeah. That is that's awesome.
Yep, and you can expose it here as a shared API as well. Yep. So yeah, I think this is super slick. And again, if it's just IDP, I still think we hold ground. Like our invoice model, I think is actually better than what I've seen from other companies. But when you look at the larger picture of things, I think fitting in the MuleSoft platform is awesome. Like any anypoint developer can now use that document action. And as you saw, you don't have to be technical to make these. So one of the beautiful parts is, especially for document extraction, I do think traditionally it's been a pretty technical approach to building it. As far as all the solutions versus us, not biased because I work here, I do get paid by them, but I genuinely do think this is the most business user-friendly way to create document extraction methods that are model-based. So like any schmuck can come in here and just like type in what they need, like a natural language, and get the data out. I'll keep taking questions. I'm going to set up one for a generic one. So generic right now, we are constantly expanding. Again, our solution just came out like late April, early May. So we only have 2 options at the moment. But I like this for contracts, and we'll talk about this in a second. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Is there a way that we can schedule the document processing, like how we do it in Composer or RPA?
Not this specifically, because this just handles the logic of how to extract it. You still need some kind of trigger. So you would still probably use, like you can use it at any point if you want, but you still need some kind of trigger to actually call this. So there's nothing in here right now to say like, every day at 10 p.m., go look at the SharePoint drive. Like you can't do this from this screen. You use this as part of different automation. So whether it's RPA, Composer, even a Salesforce flow if you wanted, or like an anypoint automation, that's where you can figure that. So right now, yeah, there's no way to trigger it from this interface we're working on. This is just building the extraction logic. Cool. And then 1 second, where did I put it? So one thing we're working on. So this is the generic one. So if you notice, there's no fields, no tables. What we do is if it's not a pre-built model, so if it's not an invoice or a purchase order, we handle everything through prompts. So right now, the way to build that logic out is through prompts. So you can still do like extract the table, blah, blah, blah. But what we're doing here is like, in this case, I can say like fees, like please return the delivery fee. We can say that. I can come in here and say, like what, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like what another one would be. What is the liability clause in this document? And I'm doing this because it's a little bit more open-ended in this contract. I'm doing this because it's a little bit more open-ended, but you can still do this for normal like documents. Like if you have a bank statement, you can say like, what is the bank ID? What is the bank date? Things like that. But I do like showing the generic one because this is where you can really get creative with really unstructured documents. So I consider like invoices and bank statements semi-structured because there's still some general structure and layout, but it's different from company to company. For truly unstructured stuff like contracts, I think this is like the really cool ability that we have. So this is, this is something that's, I have access to this right now. This will be coming out later on in the summer, but by the time anyone implements it for real, it'll be there. But this is how we work with a document that is not an invoice or a purchase order. Everything is through prompts, which is why I wanted to start with the prompts from the invoice side so you can see how to add them in. So you can see here, and what's nice is this is the Einstein result here. So $5.99, perfect. Deliver fee of $5.99. What's the liability clause? And you can see here when pulled, whatever it was from liability, provider would be there. So I will say for contracts and stuff, pretty cool because you're leveraging the technology and the intelligence of an LLM rather than a model that doesn't exist. And what I mean by that is we don't have a contract model. Okay, well, LLMs are still pretty good at that. So that's the caveat of like LLMs are still pretty good, but to that point, some really, really specific documents an LLM might not be able to handle as well because it's more of a generic model. So just understand there's still some limitations. It's not perfect. But for things like contracts, that's been able to like allow us to automate that. I know we're getting close to time and I want to leave a little bit of time real quick when I show and then I'll pause over. This is what our review page looks like. And I do want to make one distinction of what we don't do right now and what we will do. These are going to load. Okay, they will load. So this is like, hey, like it didn't hit a confidence threshold. It emails the person. You can set up however you want to notify them. Like if you wanted, you can make a composer flow to like notify them via Slack. Right now, it's just an email and they have notifications within any point when they log in. But this is what I was saying is like, let's say something's wrong. Excuse me, let me say that. I as the human can come back in here and say like, no, it is this instead or something, like type in the right answer. And I know these are more free-form fields, but imagine it's like a total. So instead of the total, I can say, no, the total is like $670 or something like that. When I type it in, we can do it. I can hit submit and done. It'll send that data back to the next step of the automation or whatever queried this in the first place. So what's cool is like when we process documents, if there's an exception where we don't hit that confidence threshold, it'll pause, prompt the user to go do this thing, and then afterward, it'll carry on where it left off. I do want to make one distinction. I think this is a nice interface. The feedback we've gotten from people has been pretty good about using it. I will say the one thing that's different between us and some other solutions, when we hit submit and done, and this is something really important, when we hit, I'm going to like go away so I can like talk to this like passionately. Our model doesn't get better at the moment. So we don't retrain based off human feedback at the moment. So if you hit submit and done, we'll have that for the one-off, but it's not going to make the model better over time.
Christine,
Christine,
hold 1 second. We lost your screen share.
Oh yeah, I hit it. There's something. Yeah, there was.
Oh, okay.
I took it away.
Sorry.
No, I took it away. But I just want to drive home a point. This is kind of where I wanted to end. I do think there's a lot of solutions out there in the market that say, hey, like when your humans review it, we'll retrain the model and it will get better over time. I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, but I will say that how well it gets better is very up to interpretation and very up to how many thousands of documents are we actually validating. So I will say, like, if you think about it, you're trying to retrain a model that was trained off hundreds of thousands of documents with maybe hundreds or thousands of human inputs. So at some point, you're fighting kind of an uphill battle of like, what does it know versus what are we trying to reteach it? And so what I would challenge people is, I think what we're seeing is the retraining and getting better is not as good as what's been promised, which is why, and I'm not going to call anyone out specifically on that, I would just say across the board, I've seen a few handful examples where the retrain really does help. And by help, maybe like 20 percentage points higher. I've also seen a lot of them where like there's not a huge change after a year of like retraining. So I think that's where we're really leaning into LLMs to be like, retraining traditionally is not working. So let's just rely on models that are better, faster, and stronger than what we can retrain. I do think that's the general direction most IDP companies are going to right now. I do think we're one of the first people to really bundle it into our product, which is why I do really like our product on that. So sorry, I know that was long, and Whitney, please don't kill me. I know you have things you need to say from the IQ side, but yeah. So, and caveat to your point, that's like when our model hits uncertainties or errors, that last screen I showed where we review, that's where you'd handle it. Is if it's ever not confident enough, it throws it over to the human, and then that's where the human provides the manual input and moves forward from there. Last thing, sorry, Whitney, just because I work for Salesforce, I do got to plug this. I will say, and this is the thing I drove home with, like, the efficiency and ROI of these processes really depends on how do you have a human manually validate? How do you have a human in the loop? How do you involve humans? How do we handle it when it's not straight through processed? You saw our review screen, but one of the cool parts about being Salesforce is a lot of people handle these documents through Salesforce. We can create work guides using flow orchestration or custom screens within Salesforce for them to actually do that review. So they don't have to go to an external product. They can actually just do all the review from Salesforce. So that's what I challenge you guys when you look at these processes is how do we most effectively give the human the ability to review the document? And I do think for a lot of our customers that have Salesforce, it's a natural fit to make Salesforce where they review these. And I think that's been real fast. I think that's been one of the challenges for some other companies is your finance team works in Salesforce or a different application. And now you're making them go to another third-party application they're not familiar with to do the review. Whereas if we can just take the review and put it into an application they're used to using, the adoption is a lot higher. So I think that's where you've seen that come in. But yeah, sorry, I know that was super long-winded. I know you definitely got stuff. I only left 3 minutes. I try to go quick, but
You did great.
hopefully that was interesting.
It was awesome. Yay.
Yes, you did really great. And like I said, I love the technical detail that you gave. I've learned a lot. Now I'm gonna go take my machine learning class in the process that I've been skipping out on. But this was really awesome, Christine. So thank you.
Yeah. And again,
okay.
if you only cared about our solutions, sorry, that was just the last 15 minutes, but hopefully you learned something about like IDP in general from like the process side of things.
Yes, 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 yes. Since we've just finished with IDP, I want to tell you guys about our MuleSoft RPA IDP lab environment. Integration Quest has purchased the automation bundle, and we want you guys to be able to get your hands on it. So we're sharing our automation bundle with you. You can have 5-day or 30-day access. And if you scan the QR code, you will see how you can procure it through us. Okay. Just so you know, there's for the 5-day access and 10,000 automation credits for the 30-day access. Also, our premier course is the professional integration with MuleSoft course. And that's going to kick off July 23rd on a Tuesday. And from that point, it's going to be every Tuesday and Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then lastly, there'll be a recording of the session in case you've missed. And again, this is twice weekly. And then if you're interested in registering for that class, you can scan this QR and it'll take you to the checkout screen. As well as Diane, you'll be the instructor for that course, right?
I'm running the current one. We may change out different instructors. So, Shivani may be doing the next one. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we really love bringing high quality talks like the one that Christine has done. So please tell your Muley friends and colleagues about Integration Quest and about our bi-weekly IQ MuleSoft study groups. And lastly, we love hearing your success stories. Francis has a success story as well as Shayna, and we love hearing yours. So if you've passed a certification exam after attending any of our certification prep, or maybe you learned something new that you were able to take back and contribute to your company, definitely tell us about it, and we'll definitely give you a shout out, and we would love to share your story on our site. And lastly, thank you again. And this happens every 2 weeks.